Welcome to another episode of On the Sofa. I'm Monia and we've got a very special guest tonight. We're on the Royal Yacht Britannia with Tim here. So we're going to be talking all about where we are, all about the history of the Royal Yacht, and getting a little insight into some stories and a bit of the tartan as well from the Royal Yacht. So Tim, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role here?
Yes, of course I can. It's one of my favourite subjects, just behind the Royal Yacht Britannia. I've been on Britannia now for just over 5 years. So I was in the Merchant Navy, I was in the Royal Air Force, and I was in the police for over 20 years.
Yes.
So coming onto the Royal Yacht is an absolutely fantastic part-time job for me, which I love. I love to tell the stories.
Brilliant. So I suppose you've sort of learned a lot of the history, a lot of the stories, but you've got a bit of your own background then that you can sort of bring into it as well.
Exactly right. The fact that I worked in the Merchant Navy means that I understand how ships work, and I know if somebody points at a piece of equipment, I know what it is. But yeah, I've done a fair amount of research on Britannia. I've read the books that there are to be read about the Royal Yacht Britannia. I've listened to the other visitor assistants like myself on board, and also the internet. You know, the internet is a fantastic thing. YouTube, there are plenty of YouTube clips. For instance, there's a very famous picture of Lady Diana on board the Royal Yacht Britannia coming out the double wooden doors. Well, that was in Montreal in 1991, and there's a YouTube clip of that. It also shows Prince Charles as well, because Prince Charles was involved and he was there as well, but the photograph that everybody sees was of Princess Diana, but Prince Charles does come into the picture and cuddles his kids as well, which was lovely to see. So things like that I really enjoy, and I also really enjoy telling the likes of yourself today, or visitors from all over the world, from Australia to New Zealand to Easter Island. People from Chile have been here, America, Canada, all over the world, China.
That's lovely. So you get a wide range of visitors sort of
yes, we do.
all year round.
And we're looking forward to welcoming them back after COVID.
Yes,
because obviously
absolutely.
at the moment it's quite rare that we have the people from overseas. But it's generally a story from Britannia regarding a lot of these countries, because Britannia have visited over 135 countries.
Oh, wow.
There are only 200 countries in the world, and 40 odd of those are landlocked.
Yes.
So Britannia visited a heck of a lot of countries.
A lot of people will have at least seen photos of their sort of country having the visits and things over the years then.
Exactly. It's amazing that the number of people who come on board here, they have their own little story about when they saw Britannia. It's just fantastic to hear that. I often, if it's something that I think that other people are interested in, I make a little note of it and I tell the story. There is a great story of the Royal Yacht Britannia in British Columbia, in either Victoria or Vancouver. I'm not sure which town it was, but they're very close to each other, so we'll say it well. And there was an officer on board now who was the stores officers, he was in charge of supplies and things like that. And he was also in charge of getting hold of local currency whenever Britannia was in a local port, because they wouldn't carry currency from all over the world. So on this particular occasion, they were going to be in port on a Sunday. Now the Queen would always go to a church or a chapel on a Sunday for Sunday service. So on this particular occasion, this officer went ashore in British Columbia, we'll say, and he went to a bank and he asked the bank teller for, let's say, $100 worth, or is it dollars in Canada?
Yes, Canadian dollars.
Canadian dollars,
yes, there we go.
With the Queen's head up.
Of course.
And he asked for these dollars, and the teller basically picked out these dollars and threw them across the counter, and the officer said, "Oh, can I have some rather cleaner money, please? Can I have some new ones?" And the teller said, "No, these are the only ones I've got." So he eventually they came to some sort of agreement. There was a little bit of a contretemps, shall we say. They came to some sort of agreement, and this teller searched through and got the best notes out. He handed them to this officer, and the officer came right back to the Royal Yacht Britannia. He went straight back to the laundry. Well, before that, he went to his room. He got a rubber or an eraser, and he cleaned both sides of all these notes.
Oh, gosh.
He then got an iron out, and he ironed and starched these notes. He handed them to somebody who handed them to somebody else, who handed them to somebody else, who handed them to the lady in waiting, who would have put them in the Queen's handbag, I've got no doubt. Queen went to church, she put the money in the collection, as she would, and that went perfectly. That evening, there was a reception on board for local dignitaries, and the officer that I'm talking about was standing just at the bottom of the royal stairway, and the Queen's bedrooms are just upstairs from that. And the Queen, looking $1 million, maybe $2 or $3 million, wearing a fantastic dress and wearing all her jewels as she does, and glided gracefully down the stairs. And she walked straight over to this officer that I'm talking about. She opened up her handbag and she pulled out a crisp-looking $10 note and handed it to him and said, "Hello, Jimmy." I can't remember his name, unfortunately. She said, "Hello, Jimmy. I think you were having a little bit of a problem with this earlier today." And it was one of the notes he'd cleaned.
Oh, wow.
Just one of the hundreds of thousands of stories, because Britannia had 44 years of service to the country, the government and the Queen, and visited all those countries. She did 1,086,623 nautical miles.
Wow.
That's the equivalent of one circumnavigation of the world for every year that she was in service. So there's so many stories.
Absolutely. So been everywhere then, sort of seen a bit of everything over the years, which is just,
certainly has,
when you sort of put it all together like that, thinking about it going around the world, it's amazing. No, that's
Sure
incredible. So can you give us, you've sort of touched a little bit on the history of the Royal Yacht, but can you tell us a bit about how it came to be birthed here in Leith as well?
Yes, well, in 1994, around about then, the government at the time had decided that Britannia would not have another major refit in 1997. So they knew that Britannia was going to be decommissioned in 1997 because of her age. She'd done all these miles, things were starting to there was a danger of things starting to break down. And the last thing they wanted was for Britannia to be in Sydney or wherever it was in the world and to break down and be towed in by a tug. They didn't want that. So they decided that there would be a new Royal Yacht. It would be 2/3 the size, 2/3 the amount of crew, reducing the cost, helicopter landing pads, state-of-the-art conference facilities, and a longer range, because Britannia's only got a range of 2.2 to 2.5 thousand miles, whereas a new one would have had a 4,000 or 5,000 mile range.
Right.
So they decided there was going to be a new Royal Yacht. However, there was a general election in our country in 1997, and the other party got in, and they came in and they said, well, we're not going to have another Royal Yacht. So the plans were shelved for that new Royal Yacht, but they did say we're going to keep it for the country. So I'm getting to the point eventually.
No, it's good.
It takes me ages sometimes to get around to what you actually asked me. I'm like a politician. That's maybe going to be my next job. So anyway, that government said we're going to keep the Royal Yacht, and they asked for tenders from around the UK. There were 3 from the Thames in London. There was 1 from Portsmouth, which was Britannia's home port. There was 1 from Glasgow, which is where she was built by John Browns, and there was 1 from Manchester. But the Edinburgh bid was more imaginative. We do early morning tours, early evening tours. We do lovely sit-down meals in this room, where up to 96 people can have a fantastic service and a fantastic meal, preceded by a tour of the Royal Yacht Britannia, which is something else. So that's why she came here, because Edinburgh was the more imaginative bid.
No, that's I'm quite proud of being from Edinburgh then, and sort of succeeding in sort of having such an amazing piece of history as well here to come and visit.
That's what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit about where we are specifically in the dining room here? Yeah,
this is the state dining room. This was where the Queen would have her meals, particularly if it was a state visit, and there were 85 state visits around the world. there would be sit-down meal for 56 people. So I'm just going to turn around a little bit here. Just behind me here, or probably to the left actually, you'll see a sword. The Queen would be on a top table there with her back to the sword. The sword was a gift from the Swedish Navy in 1956. The other members of the royal family and the visiting dignitary, whether that was Li Shenyan from China, Deng Xiaoping, or Reagan, Bush, Carter, Clinton and Ford, whoever it was, or Diefenbaker. President Diefenbaker was on here in 1959 with President Eisenhower. They actually opened the St. Lawrence Seaway in 1959.
Oh, wow.
They headed all the way up the Great Lakes, under the Mackinac Bridge down to Chicago.
Yeah.
And I think they landed in Victoria Key, for those of your viewers who are from that neck of the woods. They then headed back under the Mackinac Bridge into Lake Superior and all the way out to a place that's now called Thunder Bay, which I think is a fantastic name.
It's pretty good, yeah.
But when Britannia was there, it was Port Arthur.
Okay.
And prior to that, you might not know, but it was called Fort William. So back to what you asked me again. So there'd be the top table with the big dignitaries at the top. There'd be then a table here down the port side and another one over there down the starboard side. One would be headed by the Admiral, the other one would be headed by the head of the household. Then in my little world, it then went in rank order. So you'd have your lords, your earls, your barons, your doctors. So if I was invited, I'd probably be about 850 miles in that direction. But yeah, they'd sit down. That would be the State Banquet 56. This is actually the biggest room on the ship. It had to be specially strengthened at the side so that they could have this big open space. And would you believe, underneath the carpet is a dance floor. Now, to my knowledge, it was only ever used once, and that was for Princess Anne's 21st birthday party. But they would have even ordinary meals in here, and if they were deep sea and the Queen was on board, maybe the Admiral would certainly eat the main meal with the Queen, and maybe a couple of the other officers would join them for polite conversation, shall we say.
Very nice. It's funny to think with the sort of just us being in here, imagining it so full of people and the big dinners and everything that used to happen in here. It's amazing.
Well, there was plenty of sort of elbow room when there were 56 on here, and there's still plenty of room when we have our dinners on here with 96. The other thing I maybe mention to you as well, around the walls and in the little alcoves, there are gifts that the Queen was given from all over the world. For instance, there's a ceremonial peace pipe from the Sioux Indians. That was from 1976 when the Queen was over just after the bicentenary. She sailed down Britannia sailed down the Delaware River into Philadelphia on the 6th of July 1976. She then sailed around onto Pier 88 in New York 2 days later, and then 2 days after that she was in Boston. A week or so after that she was in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and then down to Montreal for the Olympics. A busy couple of weeks for the Queen.
Absolutely.
But luckily for the crew, I'm told, I only heard this recently, because this was a plum job for the crew, of which there were 220. There were 20 officers and one admiral. But it was a plum job for them. I'm told that after that little bit of hard work, they had a little bit of a holiday in a place called New Orleans.
Oh, wow.
That's a nice holiday, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I'd love to go to New Orleans.
Yeah, definitely.
The music, fantastic.
I'm sure some of our viewers are likely from that sort of area of the world as well. No, it must be amazing, all that hard work on board and then...
Yeah, because even though the Queen wasn't on board all the time, the Queen would... Say, for instance, there was a state visit to Australia. That's quite a distance away. Britannia would maybe head out 5 or 6 weeks beforehand, visiting various places, doing work for the government. They used to do business deals on board here, where businessmen, perhaps from wherever, they were in Bombay on one occasion. There were businessmen from India speaking to British businessmen on the Royal Yacht Britannia, and they made £1.5 billion worth of deals.
Oh, wow.
Or they signed them on here. You know, they've maybe made them before there, but that was what Britannia did for the UK. But so Britannia would be heading out to Australia 5 or 6 weeks beforehand. The Queen would then fly out and join Britannia, and maybe be on Britannia, on and off Britannia during a visit for a couple of weeks or whatever.
Amazing. So a lot that I suppose I didn't know as well in the history, sort of going back all those years.
Yeah.
So probably a hard question next, but what is
question.
your favourite part of the role here? It might be hard to narrow down. But
Well, it is, because absolutely every item on this ship has got a story. It's either a piece of equipment, it's maybe a photograph or an item that the Queen's been given.
Yeah.
But every one of those has got a little story. But for me, my personal best bit is what I'm doing now. Talking to the people who visit, and listening to their little stories about the Queen or the royal family or Britannia, but also giving them that little story that they can go away with. Quite often, because Britannia did over 900 visits in 135 countries in the world, whenever somebody comes on and they say they're from America, say, and they maybe say we're from Miami, I'll say, well, the Royal Yacht Britannia was in Miami in 1991, and Reagan, Bush, Carter, Clinton and Ford came on board the Royal Yacht Britannia. Little story? Do we have time for a little story?
Absolutely, we love a little story.
Yeah, this is quite a well-known story, but it is one of my favourites.
Yeah.
And they'd been up the Amazon. Prince Charles had been on board, and they'd sailed some distance up the Amazon in Brazil. Needed an Amazonian Indian to help them to navigate up the Amazon, because sometimes it's very wide, narrow, deep, shallow. So the Amazonian Indian helped them. Then they'd come back to somewhere near Cuba. They'd rescued a foreign national who was trying to escape any problems that had been there at the time on a 3 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot piece of polystyrene.
Wow.
He'd run out of food, he'd run out of water, and Britannia rescued him. But that isn't the story I was going to tell you. But she was up the west coast on 3 occasions as well. Don't quote me on this, but 1969, certainly 1983, because I've got a menu from Trader Vic's in San Francisco in my back pocket that the Queen had when she was in Trader Vic's in San Francisco. But they were in Long Beach on one of these 3 occasions, and it was extremely bad weather, not the kind of weather that they've had recently where it's been very horrible fires and things. But this was the opposite. This was some kind of storm. Very bad floods in the area of Long Beach and all these places. Now, the Queen would normally go ashore in a Rolls Royce or a limousine or a Cadillac. But on this occasion there were big floods on the roads of 2 and 3 feet, so Queen couldn't go out ashore in one of these. So do you know what she did? I don't know if you guys, certainly you folks at home will know, but the big yellow army or school buses that they have in America?
Yes.
They're sometimes brand spanking new, but sometimes they're a little bit tatty, and maybe a little bit rusty. Well, they commandeered one of these from either a local school or from the army, and they drove it up to the side of the Royal Yacht Britannia. They gave the Queen a pair of wellies and asked her to get on the boat, on the bus.
That's amazing.
Now, she would have loved that, because that was being like an ordinary human being. I think she would have felt. I'm sure she would love being in an ordinary tatty bus like that.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm sure she remembers that. And as you'll know, she even jumps out of helicopters.
Exactly. Didn't miss that one on telly
Yeah, that was
years
fantastic.
ago.
That was brilliant. The whole world went, what?
A lot of shock.
007's pushed her out.
That was very good at the London Olympics opening ceremony, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Very good. Look that one up on YouTube if you haven't seen it already.
Yeah, very worth a 5-minute watch. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we hear that you wrote a book, actually, Tales from the Britannia.
Yeah.
So can you give us a little insight into that? Is that sort of your favourite stories, or what sort of things can you find in that?
Yeah, it's a book that's available on Kindle, and we sell it at the shop here as well. When I was in all these different jobs that I've done, I've always had a notebook. Obviously in the police, in the Merchant Navy, and in the Royal Air Force, I had a notebook which gave me all my information. So when I arrived on Britannia, the first thing I did was I bought myself a little notepad and started writing telephone numbers and the length of the ship, the number of crew, and facts about different parts of the equipment. And then I started reading the books and doing my own research, and I was writing all the little stories. And I did it chronologically, I did it through the years, and then I I found out about the history of the monarchy and the history of royal yachts, because Britannia is the 83rd royal yacht since 1660. Found out about that, and I thought, I'm telling people as they come on board all these stories. I wonder if I should write a book. So 2018, I self-published. I did all the editing myself. I got a few people on board actually to have a look at some of the facts that I'd written, and got them to check the spelling a little bit. And my daughter, Suzanne O'Brien, she helped me to edit it properly, because I wrote it like a policeman.
Yeah.
So it was like a report, but she wrote it so that anyone could read it. A 5-year-old kid or a 95-year-old lady or a gent could read my book, full of the anecdotes, but a bit of history as well.
Yeah.
The nice little stories. Some facts and figures, which some people might not be interested in, but the stories are fantastic.
The best of both worlds.
I've got another little story for you.
Please tell.
Yeah, 1969. Correction, 1967. The Royal Yacht Britannia was heading to Montreal for Expo 67. And would you believe, somewhere on approach, 4 racing pigeons spotted the Royal Yacht Britannia at a distance. Now they've flown quite a distance. Their arms and their wings are a little bit sore, a little bit fatigued.
Yeah.
So they thought, there's the Royal Yacht Britannia in the distance there. We're going to have a rest. So they flew straight onto the Royal Britannia, onto the bridge deck. Now they were racing pigeons, so they were easily handled. Now we have places where we store the flags at the back of the bridge on the top deck, and they're about that size, and they're square, made of wood, and that's where the flags would go in. Perfect size for a pigeon. So they picked these pigeons up, and they put these pigeons into these boxes, and the pigeons were able to have a little bit of a rest. Now that's a nice story, isn't it? But it doesn't finish there, because one of those pigeons was a lady pigeon. Guess what she did?
She have a little baby section
She
in
did.
there.
She laid an egg. Now here's the question for you. What did they do with the egg?
What did they do?
They took it down to the engine room, and the engine room is steam. And if you ever visit, folks, if you ever visit, the engine room is fantastic. It is pristine. It is in the condition now that it was when she was in service and throughout her service. There are brass things in there that are highly polished. There's no dust, there's no dirt in that. So anyway, they took this rather small egg down to the engine room. They put it, obviously, not too close to a pipe, otherwise it would have cooked. They put it close enough, and they incubated it. It eventually hatched. They fed it on milk and bread and water, and it eventually fledged. So it flew. So I'm assuming the DNA, maybe 100 times removed now, because that's 70 odd years ago, the DNA of that bird is still flying around in Canada somewhere, going round and round and round, wondering where home is, because home's now moored in Edinburgh.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's amazing.
Just that's one of the stories that's in my book. If I keep talking to you like this, I won't have to sell my book to the people from around the world.
So another thing that we sort of read about before coming on is that the Britannia was designed to be converted to a hospital ship in time of war. Is that correct?
Yes, it was. Yeah, there was a few stipulations around that. It had to be convertible quickly. I think within 24 hours, and all the royal apartments would have been devoid of all the royal stuff. They would have stored that downstairs, and they would have put beds. These would be where we are now would be the wards. It had to have air conditioning, which it does in the royal apartments. It had to have a certain amount of speed, because Britannia could do in the region of 22.5 knots at a push, but generally 20 to 21 knots, so she was fast. And she also needed a certain amount of stability. Now there were 2 appendectomies done on here, would you believe? In the 50s, the early 50s, I think 1956, 57. One was on a scientist from the Gough Islands, which is in the South Atlantic. It's at the time it was a very remote weather watching station where there were 4 scientists, and one of them had appendicitis. Another one was on an officer of a ship, an Argentinian ship, and he came on board the Royal Yacht Britannia, and he had an appendectomy as well. Now, they needed stability to carry out these kind
of.
So what they had were like two electro-hydraulic. This is where it gets technical a little bit. Electro-hydraulic wings, effectively, which were stored in the bottom of the ship, inside the ship, and they would be put out. And there were like little ailerons on these, and it was gyro stabilized, so the gyros would sense when the ship was going one way or the other, and they would apply these little ailerons to make the ship stable. So it would reduce the roll of 20 degrees down to 6 degrees, which is quite handy if they're operating on your appendicitis. But she was never used as a hospital ship. There were thoughts of her going to the Falklands for the Falklands War, but for various reasons that didn't happen. The only real time she was used in that kind of capacity was when they rescued over 1,000 foreign nationals from Aden during the Civil War there. There's an interesting story there if you want. Have you got time?
Yeah, absolutely.
They rescued people from all different nationalities. I'm told there was what would happen, Britannia would have been either steaming or at anchor offshore because there were bullets and missiles flying around. And they would have sent the small boats ashore and they would have ferried people backwards and forwards, like I say, over 1,000 people, all different nationalities. Now, one of the nationalities was a Russian. And he marched on board and he went to the Admiral and said, I am the Russian, because he had a big deep voice and he was a big fella, I am the Russian ambassador to Aden, put me in touch with the Kremlin immediately. 30 seconds later, he was speaking to somebody in the Kremlin. And this is 1986. So that shows you the kind of communication there was on here, because the Queen had to be in contact. You know, there would be times in those days when there would be a loss of contact, but there were satellites in those days, so they would have probably had more or less a good communication all the time. But that isn't the story I was going to tell you. So one of the foreign nationals that they rescued was a Frenchman. But initially he was refusing to be rescued because he had a dog with him. Okay? And they said, well, we want to rescue you, but we don't bring the dog because we're trying to rescue human beings here. And the Frenchman said, well, if you're not rescuing me and the dog, you won't be rescuing me. Well, of course, that would be quite embarrassing had he been injured or worse. So I think the decision was made on board by the hierarchy, look, just bring him on board and bring him on board with the dog. So they brought him on board. Bear in mind, the Queen never had her dogs on board here because there are Burmese teak decks, and if the dogs had been doing their business, it would have been a bit of a mess. So that was the reason, and quarantine as well. You know, if you go to another country, you need to quarantine animals, so that would be another reason that her dogs and animals were not on board. So wherever Britannia was in the world, she was always escorted. Now, it'd probably be one or two British ships, or if they were in Canada or America or Australia, it might be a local ship plus a British ship. And on this particular occasion, I'm sure it was HMS Newcastle was the escort ship, and there was a carpenter on board, and the carpenter made a lamppost for the dog to wheel.
That's amazing.
That's a lovely story for him.
Well, you got to...
Did I answer the question? I can't remember what the question was.
I think, we were speaking about the war,
the war
times.
Yeah.
So
and,
that's really
and
interesting.
If there was a war, this was also effectively a secret bunker for the Queen. They would head up the Western Isles, which in the 70s and 80s would have been impossible to see from anywhere, with radar and things like that. Nowadays it would be very difficult to hide Britannia anywhere in the world.
Absolutely.
But in those days they would have gone up the Western Islands, and that's where the Queen would have, perhaps it was one of the options.
Yeah.
Good work.
Oh wow. So is there anything that when visitors come on board the Royal Yacht that really surprises them in particular, sort of, I don't know, around the rooms or about the actual yacht itself?
Yeah, I think the size. I don't think they realise that the Royal Yacht Britannia is the size that she is. And it's a little bit like the TARDIS, and for folks in the States or wherever in the world who are watching this, the TARDIS was Doctor Who's famous time ship, which when you went inside it was absolutely massive, but only looked like the size of a police box, which is about 6 foot by 6 foot, but it's massive. And Britannia's a little bit like that. People come on board and they think, this is massive, didn't expect it to be. We thought we would be on and off in half an hour, but you can be on. It took me 4.5 hours to go around Britannia the first time. A lot of people take about an hour and a half for the talk, because we have handsets, and it leads people around at a nice pace
Yeah.
with just enough information. I think probably I like to stand just on that corner, just over there. You can't see it, but well, that's a ceremonial pig killer over there from the New Hebrides. But just to the left of that, where the fire exit is, there's a door there. And there's a corridor along there which goes past the 3 galleys. And then all of a sudden, they come round that corner there, and they see something like this.
Yeah.
And they go, wow, this is unbelievable. And I like to stand there and look at people's faces. So perhaps that's answered your question.
No, absolutely. I think it's the same. Like, I've grown up around Edinburgh, and I've been coming to Ocean Terminal on and off for years. So for me, it's really nice to hear these things and sort of make it real. Imagine it actually sort of travelling the world. Imagine the royal family sort of living their lives here, which is really amazing. So for me, it's been basically my whole life, it's been here. So I can't imagine it sailing the world, like you say, round and round every year. It's quite amazing. So no, it's lovely to hear all these stories.
Well, it's great to have you on board. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. And just to finish us off, we wouldn't be Scotland Shop if we didn't ask about tartan. So we can see that you are wearing tartan trousers as part of your sort of of your uniform here. So is there any story or anything behind the tartan for the Royal Yacht?
Yes, this is the Britannia corporate tartan. So only the likes of myself as a visitor assistant, or the guys and the girls in the shop wear it. So there are 5 different colours relevant to the colours on the side of the ship. So we've got red for below the waterline. We've got the Royal Navy for the Royal Navy, because this was a Royal Navy ship. We've got blue bottle blue, which is the main hull. Sorry, rewind. Yeah, no, it is. Yeah. Blue bottle blue is the colour of the hull of the ship. Gold for the 24 karat gold line that goes around the ship.
Oh, amazing.
Now a little digress.
Absolutely.
The pot of paint that they painted the ship originally with the 24 karat gold cost £90.
Okay.
But it was £150 for labour to paint it. So there. The white superstructure, you can see a little bit of white there. And this is manufactured locally in Edinburgh.
Amazing.
So it's the Britannia corporate tartan.
So was that just designed then for, I guess, for it being in Leith then, if it was done locally, or was it sort of before that just happened to be designed in Edinburgh?
No, it was Britannia's only been here since 1998.
Yeah.
I think initially there was a local shop. They provided the shop facility, and they used their own tartan. And then I think we moved on, and we developed our own shop, which is an online shop as well. And I think at some point, I'm not exactly certain as to when it arrived, but it arrived sometime after Britannia had been here.
Amazing.
And I have to say, having worn a number of uniforms in my life, Merchant Navy, Royal Air Force and Police, this is the best uniform I've had.
It looks very smart, so I'm not surprised. Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us and telling us all about the Royal Yacht Britannia. It's been amazing.
I could sit here for another 25 hours to tell you the story.
I would happily listen to it.
Great. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for another exciting episode. Yep. Amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.